Okay, guys. So I appreciate you all letting me do our lectures this way. I know this is not the best way to do class. I know we're all tired of this from, COVID and Zoom, but um, it is what it is. I'll be back in the classroom next week, but I know that we still need to keep going because we have a lot to cover. So um, I know this is introduction to DSLR, but this was some of the stuff that we didn't get to talk about the first week. Um, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about the digital sensor and how the sensor itself creates the image in your camera, and then how that in turn can impact the format. Because I know I've gotten a lot of questions from you about what is RAW versus JPEG, why we have to turn in both, what's the difference. And so we're going to go a little over that a little bit in this lecture. So when you think about the digital sensor, basically it is how everything gets recorded on your camera. All of the light, the electrons, and everything, and how it creates a picture. The digital sensor is the foundation in which an exposure is made. So when you think about what we've been talking about with ISO and aperture and shutter speed and how that creates the exposure triangle, all of that gets recorded on your digital sensor. Basically, a sensor is um, a material that records light, and then that light gets recorded into electronic signals. Um, when you think about film, it's a light sensitive material that records an image. When you think of digital and a digital sensor, one way is to say that it's also a mechanism for taking light and recording the image. It just, instead of converting it onto the film, it converts it into electrons. Um, to understand how a digital sensor works, you need to understand what light is. And light is basically the visible part of an electromagnetic spectrum. Light is made up of waves of energy, and light is what we can see. Um, so, on the light spectrum, of course, there are several different types of rays. Um, the visible spectrum, as you can see right here, is what we can see. And your camera can take that visible spectrum and those colors and record it onto a digital sensor. There are cameras that can detect ultraviolet or infrared rays, but we're not going to get into that. Those are specialty cameras. And so basically, what happens is it takes all this information from the visible spectrum and it puts it onto the sensor. And what your sensor is it's basically a silicone wafer. And then on that silicone wafer are these tiny little things called photosites. And photosites are microscopic machines that absorb photons or light waves. And then they release them into the camera as electrons or electric waves, which then converts them into the photo that you capture. So each photosite sensor represents one pixel. So when you think about a camera that has like 22.3 megapixels, essentially it has 23 million or 22,300,000 photosites all on your sensor. So when you think about how expensive cameras are, that's kind of why, right? You have all these microscopic sensors on this little silicone wafer and it's recording it. And so the more photosites you have, the higher your pixels are. The more pixels you have, the better picture you get. So you see why it can be more expensive. So what is a pixel? Basically, it's an element of a picture, and any single point on an image or a graphic design is called a pixel. Rasterized images are made up of pixels. Um, excuse me. And so pixels are all the little dots that make up your photo. Um, Pixels and their relation to size and resolution basically The more pixels you have per square inch, the better your resolution and the bigger you can print your photo. Um, your resolution is the level of detail you can see in a digital image. And so if you have more pixels, you're able to zoom in more and see more detail. When you don't have as many pixels or um, the image resolution is smaller, the more you zoom in, the less detail you get. So when you think of an image that is printed out like on a billboard, it has a lot of pixels, it has a big image resolution. But when you think of something that you've pulled like off Facebook or Google, it has a small resolution because it's been compressed. And we're going to talk about compression here in a minute. And the more compressed an image is, the less resolution it has. So to get more pixels and more resolution, you should have a bigger sensor. And there are two formats when it comes to a camera sensor. And the first one is a full frame. And basically, when you think of a full frame camera, it's meaning that the sensor is capturing the equivalent of a 35 millimeter film. When you have a bigger sensor, it's more expensive because it has more photo sites on that sensor because it's collecting more data. However, having a full sensor, even though most photographers prefer that because you're getting more um, pixels per image, you're getting more of the image overall. Crop sensors, such as the APS-H and the APS-C on a Canon and Nikon, are fine, especially for newer photographers or people on a budget. And just because it shrinks the size of your of what's collected, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Sometimes it actually has advantages, especially for people who do like sports or nature photography, because essentially what it does is it changes the focal length of your lens. So essentially you're getting a longer lens in exchange for what it's recording. Let's take a look at a picture to see how that makes sense. So, this is from a full frame camera. You can see lots of detail. There's a wider image, per se, of this farmer and his vines. Now, if you had a cropped sensor, it's going to crop in on this fuller image, and you would need to adjust where your camera is located because you can see like some of the vines are cut off, the post is cut off, his hat is cut off. So you would have to adjust. But if you think about if you were trying to find maybe a deer in the background of these vines, if with a crop sensor, you would be able to get more of the depth with your lens. So there's some advantages and disadvantages to a full or crop sensor. Now that we've talked a little bit about the sensor and how it collects the light and creates the image, I want to talk about file formats. So there are several different formats that you'll learn about, especially if you go into graphic design. But for photography, there are two that we use, and they are called RAW and JPEG. JPEG is stands for the Joint Photographic Expert Group. It is basically the most popular digital photography format of images behind a PDF. And basically, what it is it's a compression format. And it's universal for viewing and printing. So you can put it on a camera, on your phone, and you can see the image. It doesn't have to be converted. However, JPEG suffers from what's called lousy compression, and each time a JPEG is saved, it goes under another level of compression, and after a while, that compression breaks down your image and kind of turns it into digital mush. Now, that will take a lot of saving, over and over and over again, lots of editing. But eventually, you're not going to get the crisp picture that you want to print. Um, so you have to be careful with how many times you save a JPEG. However, on the other hand, you have what's called a RAW format. And um, this format allows your photo to capture everything that your camera sensor absorbs. Um, and so if you go into your settings on your camera, you can choose JPEG or RAW or for it to shoot both. I don't suggest that because it'll take up a lot on your memory card. But what essentially you have to think about is that if you choose to shoot in RAW on your camera, it's collecting all this natural, unprocessed data. And if you choose to just do JPEG, it's compressing that file and you're losing information from your picture to basically save room on your camera. One way to think about it is thinking about raw food. So you have a steak that is uncooked, unseasoned. That is your raw photo. It's just natural, everything, all the information, right? And then with that, you get all this higher bit depth, all this color information. Basically, it has more information that you'll ever need that you can use to then go through and edit it. So when you do JPEG, it's already compressing that file and it's somewhat cooked. It may not be cooked all the way, well done, but it's taking some of that unprocessed element and processing it and compressing it. So you're not getting that all the information you would need for a picture. So let's take a look at it. On the left side, you have a raw picture, and on the right side, you have a JPEG. And you might think, oh, well, I think the JPEG looks better. There's more colors, it's brighter. Um, but that's because it's more processed, right? It's taking some of the elements out. Whereas with the raw picture, you could determine how blue the sky is, how yellow the sky's shirt is. And so those are some things to think about. Why do you want to shoot in RAW? Well, basically, if you shoot in RAW and then bring it into your computer, you have greater control of how you interpret the adjustments. So when you talk about how blue the sky is, how yellow the sky's shirt is, how dark the shadows are, all of that information you can adjust. If you just use JPEG, you can still do that, but it's going to keep compressing, and you don't have all the information that you would have in a raw picture. So uh, think about that. Do you want a medium rare steak that's been untouched, or do you want really cooked meat on a sub sandwich? You have to think about how that works in photos and how you're editing. Now, not all formats are the same. NEF goes to Nikon, CR2 is with Canon. And so you have all these different ones that are particular to certain sensors. You also have Sony and different ones. And so just know that when you pull them in, depending on your camera, they could be different. They're not going to say raw, they're going to be an NEF or a CR2 for most people. So, all right, that's all I had for today on this. We will talk a little bit more about exposure in another lecture I'm going to record for you, and then how that all plays into your photography project. So stay tuned. I'll get this uploaded for you.